Well, greetings, future social workers, and welcome to Case Management 535 for your MSW program. I am super excited to be your instructor. My name is Dr. Antonio Mexico, and I will serve as your professor for our case management class this term. Now, I do realize some of you may have already had me for other courses. If that's the case, welcome back. I'm happy to have you. If you've not met me before, that's absolutely okay. Believe all the rumors you've heard. Yes, they're just as bad as what you've heard. I'm just kidding. We're going to take this course nice and slow. I hope that you have a good time and you find this course practical and informative, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start off today's lecture, our first lecture for this course, nice and easy. We're going to do an introduction, okay, of case management. I'm going to talk about what case management is. I'm also going to talk about policy in this class very lightly. We're going to cover one policy as it relates to serving individuals without housing, formerly, you may have heard of as homeless populations. But today, in order to explain policy a little better and set the background for our discussion of policy that will occur later in the term, I'm also going to discuss a major policy change related to the field of social work that I'm sure many of you will be impacted by. And so what I'm going to do is share with you that information so that you know when you leave this program, you will be ahead of the curve in what is expected from you as a social worker. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get rolling with the lesson here, okay? So like I said before, welcome to Case Management Social Work 535. It is a pleasure to have you in class and to continue on with this journey related to case management. Now, some of you may be saying, what is case management? I'm not quite sure what it is, or some of you may have an idea of what it is, and that's absolutely fine too. Case management, what we're talking about is the overall care and coordination of services, and particularly also the documentation of services related to the clients that you will be serving. As a social worker, many of you know that at some point along the way, all of you will have to document services, create an assessment for a client, so determining what services, resources are going to be needed, okay, when serving a family. And you also are going to be responsible for updating sometimes your agency, your supervisor, the court, as well as the clients on the progress of that treatment or that case, okay? Now, this class, for the purpose of the MSW program, is also considered to be one of your writing classes. So in this class, you can expect that you will receive a few assignments, okay, that are going to be oriented not only in writing, but writing like a social worker, okay? Some of you may be saying, oh gosh, here we go. I'm in a writing class. To a degree, yes, but I want to make a promise to you for this course. And as some of you may have heard either through others in the program or if you've experienced in other courses with me, is that when I make a promise, I do stick to it, okay? So yes, this is a writing course, and yes, we are responsible as faculty to teach you the successful skills on what it means to write like a social worker, okay? That's what case management is for. Case management is also designed to assist you in your case management skills. What I promise you is that the writing that you do in this course will be 100% applicable to your role as a future social worker. If you can write successfully in this course, you will be able to write successfully as a social worker. And I can tell you personally from experience that I am so grateful that someone had sat down with me and instructed me on how to write as a social worker and be effective in my case management, because over the years, that is what has been able to move me forward throughout my career, okay? So whatever I give you in this course will be from personal experience, will be from personal successes, and I'm going to give you tips on how to avoid some of the pitfalls that I did in my case management, as well as in my, my documentation. And I promise you, I'm going to give you actual templates that Riverside County uses in particular, so that when you step out of this field, out of this class and out of this program, you will be prepared for the field in which you're entering, okay? I hope that sounds okay. But we're going to do this and we're going to have fun in the process, okay? Believe me, we will. All right, so a little bit about me. And so some of you may have seen intros and other courses to about me. And so what I do is I like to keep it fresh in regards to some fun facts about myself. Warning to you all that your professor, Dr. Mexico, has discovered and finally broke down and made his own Bitmoji. So you will all be able to suffer all right, with everyone else in my life who is now exposed to my Bitmoji rampage, okay? And so what I'm gonna do for today is to just give you a few facts about me in Bitmoji form. So here we go. One fun fact about me, I am a coffee addict. I love coffee. And in particular, I love to drink coffee every day in the morning and throughout the day if I possibly can. Many of you, if you see me live for a lecture, will see a cup of coffee in my hand. So that's a little bit about me. Second thing, I love sushi. I love sushi. I dream of sushi, okay? I actually crave sushi if I don't get enough of it as frequently as I should. So that's one other fact about me. Second thing, I love movies. I love movies in particular of most genres, but my favorite movie genre is actually scary movies and horror films. And so I'm a big scary movie buff. My wife and I love to watch scary movies together. And before all of this social distancing stuff, then I also enjoyed, my wife and I enjoyed going to those themed scary movie parks like Universal Studios, Halloween Horror Nights, or Not Scary Farm, or Long Beach, the Shipwreck, and all of those other things. So just a little fun about me. My last fact is that I happen to be also very sarcastic. I don't know if any of you have experienced that in some of my classes, not over the top, but just very subtle, sometimes sarcastic remarks. So as we move through this class, you may experience a little bit of that coming from me. And so those are just a couple of facts. Now, for those of you who have not had class with me before, in terms of my professional background, I also want to share with you that for the past 15 years, I've worked in the field of child welfare. And in particular, I've been serving foster youth as well as youth who are incarcerated, as well as youth who were in gangs, okay? Particularly in Santa Ana and a few in Moreno Valley. That population I've had the opportunity to serve has been through direct case management. Later on in my career, due to the skills that I'm going to share with you in this class, I was blessed with the opportunity to move into supervisor positions, later on into director positions, regional director positions, and I've served in some executive positions, and I still stay involved in policy and legislation work groups at the state level, helping to shape child welfare policy impacting children and families. So when I share with you the policies that have been impacting social workers, I must say that I have been part of some of these discussions around what these policies look like in action. And so what I'm sharing with you is current, it's relevant, it's something that you will experience in your jobs should you enter into the field of child welfare. Okay, enough about that. One thing I do want to share with you is one little video. In the past, I've shared this video with other classes to explain a little bit about my heart. And so if I were to summarize sort of the passion and the energy that I've been able to carry with me and been blessed to carry with me over the past 15 years, it comes from a TED Talk from another social worker who has had a similar background working with children who have had very difficult lives in the past. And so I want to share with you this very quick TED Talk. It's delivered in spoken word. It exhibits a little bit about my heart, and then we're going to move on with the lesson, okay? So let's check out this quick video, short TED Talk, and we will commence.
When I tell people what I do for a living, they often respond by saying things like, "Bless your soul, that must be difficult." And my all-time favorite, "It's so nice to see someone not working for the money." I'm a social worker. I tend to the wounds of people crucified to circumstance, carry hope and band-aids in my briefcase, share my own scars for street cred. I work with kids who see their probation officers more than their fathers. They wear sagging pants in their parents' mistakes, introduce themselves as accidents waiting to happen. They are Hollywood casting directors' wet dream, tattooed with the temper. Do-rag D-boys, boys in the hood, mi vida loca. They speak in sign language because they have been taught they are voiceless. Marginalization is the chip on their shoulder. It is so heavy they walk with a limp, pass it off as swag. Their fingers, more familiar with pipes than pencils. Eye-smoked crows paint their worldview the color of devils as they search for God or anyone else they can just look up to. Each one has a story. Emilio wants to change. So he keeps a lucky penny in his pants pocket, along with the quarter I gave him to call with whenever he is in need. In the desperation of his 15-year-old eyes, I see more potential than an idea Rivera never manifested on the canvas. He makes the city his, scribes pieces of his soul into windows, not knowing his pain is as transparent as the glass, sprays a masked moniker underneath street lamps, so he always shines brighter than the darkness of his insecurities. He left his self-esteem next to his cigarette butt at the bottom of a bottle bought by relatives who see no problem feeding fires. He screams in spontaneous combustion, but believes nobody's listening, so he commits another crime. He likes going to court because there, at least he knows someone is paying attention to his sentences. I am his social worker attempting to make sense of his syntax. He didn't fall through the cracks, they swallowed him. I've seen it happen in broad daylight. Some turning the other cheek, cowering behind the clouds, concrete quicksand traps used like Venus fly, homies who claim to have backs, fronts, offering no help, and so many of our kids are sinking. Emilio asks me for direction, but there's only one way to go from where he is. I show him his heartbeat's his compass. We look at the scars on his psyche. I ask if he's ready to replace them with dirt underneath his fingernails. He asks me how he is supposed to escape the sand. I remind him he cannot ask for one to guide his footsteps if he's not willing to move his feet first. I speak in cliches, talk of butterflies and phoenixes and of hip-hop and so many ugly things that have bloomed into beauty. I speak in truths. I tell him I don't know if things will be okay. I showed him statistics are stalking him in prisons, at housewarming parties. I tell him the streets, they don't change, but I know that people do. Hope is not a helium for balloon that is slipped on our fingertips. We do not have to watch potential float away. I am a social worker. I work with kids who learn to spell stigma before their first names, but each one is an artist learning to draw their own conclusions. Their pencils are heavy burdens built without erasers on purpose, because sometimes the best thing you can do is not go back. I am a social worker, and no, I don't do it for the money. I do it simply because I still believe in people, and I really hope that you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and all of you still do too.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that video as much as I do. I love watching that video because I think it speaks very nicely to the heart of who we are as social workers. So some of you are going to go off and you're going to work with adults, okay? Or you're going to work with aging populations. Some of you are going to work with veterans. Some of you are going to work with individuals without housing. Some of you are going to work with the LGBTQ plus community. And whatever the case is, I hope that you can take that same passion and zeal for social work and advocacy into your job, whomever you're serving, okay? So I hope that you found that video interesting. So the structure of our lessons is going to be the same for all of our classes. The content is what will be different. So one of the things that you can rest assured with me is that all of our content will be presented in the same structure. Our structure for our classes will be similar to my live class structure that I do. So if you are part of our distance learning cohort, okay, you will not have any content reduced or cut. I'm going to make sure you are delivered with everything that I would give my class if I were meeting live, okay? And so in the beginning portion of our lectures and our time together in class, you'll have lecture and curriculum. I'm going to break into at times some activities and some applications. So I may talk about on a practical level when it comes down to doing the work or implementing the theories that I may be discussing in class. I promise that I'll make sure you'll always know, what does this look like in the real world? What does this look like beyond the textbook in which the theory is being taught? Okay, I want to give you food for thought, food to be able to engage in discourse. Discourse is discussion, okay? In academia, we refer to discussion as discourse. And what I would like for you to be able to do is engage in discourse with each other, to engage in discourse with other professionals that you may encounter in your practicum or in your placements, discourse with your faculty, and even discourse with your family and friends. And so I'm going to present to you material in my courses that I teach that will give you something to think about and something that you may want to even talk about with others. And that's my hope for you. When we engage in discourse, we can exchange ideas, even though they're different. And when we can exchange different ideas and truly try to hear each other out, we can come up with some really amazing strategies, okay? And so finally, then it will end each session with a centering exercise. If you're unsure what centering is, that is absolutely okay. You do not need to know. It's something that's very easy to do. It's something that helps me stay focused and connected in my faith whenever I feel nervous or anxious or overwhelmed, or I just need to focus before going into an important moment in my life. I'm going to teach you the practice of centering, and every lecture we will end with a centering exercise, okay? So let's go ahead and dive into a quick overview of case management, what you can expect for this course, and the journey that we're going to take in regards to this class. There are many student learning outcomes that are in your syllabus, okay? And so there are more than just the 3 entered here, but I wanted to highlight 3 in particular, as these will be areas of focus for this class and for our time together. There's too much of my face showing, so let's move that out of the way. Okay, 1, we're going to articulate and critically apply best practices and evidence-based interventions. Let's listen to this terminology, okay? Evidence-based interventions to guide the process of engagement, assessment, intervention, evaluation, and termination, and follow up with clients. Okay, this is a lot of verbiage going on here. In a nutshell, we are going to learn about the generalist intervention model as it relates to case management. Case management has a process that we follow. The good thing is that as a social worker for the past 15 years serving, I have learned to trust the process. When you can trust this process of engagement, assessment, intervention, evaluation, termination, and follow-up, okay, you can move clients from being in a very vulnerable and difficult place in their lives, okay, whether this be through clinical or non-clinical work. But if you follow this process of the generalist intervention model for case management, you can gain huge successes with your clients. And so this is what we're going to cover. If you look at the syllabus, you'll also see that I've staggered the weeks in order to walk us through this process the same way we would a case or with a client, okay? So I'm giving you practical experience here related to case management. For a second, we're going to work on gaining knowledge and skills to intervene with individuals, families, and groups, organizations, and communities, and apply case management skills to the generalist intervention model, like I said, those phases there, okay? And finally, what I'm going to help you do is articulate the Christian worldview in relation to social work ethics and values, and understand case management in congregational context. One of the things I'm very excited about today in particular is I'm going to talk about policy, one policy in particular that has drastically shaped the field that you will be stepping into as social workers related to case management, and I'm going to tie that to biblical themes of policy that we saw in Jesus' time, okay? So we're going to do that today. Really quickly, you're saying that's exciting, that's great, oh boy, or some of you are saying, I don't know what I signed up for, I can't believe I'm taking this course, how do I get out? Whatever the case is, here's your way out, okay? 1,000 points, okay? Some of you are saying, good, this is what I want to see. Your type A personalities, you want that A. Here's how you get the A. 1,000 points gets the A, okay? Now your discussions, or I'm sorry, your assignments for this course are going to be broken into these categories here. So over the course of this semester, I will be assigning all of these things to you here with the purpose of giving you practical experience, okay, related to case management to prepare you all to be able to go out and document like a social worker, write like a social worker, and plan like a social worker in serving your clients. I'm going to give you this stuff because what's important to understand is you will be using this whether or not you are thinking of going clinical, okay, and you're thinking about working maybe within a clinic and doing therapy, you're going to need these skills. If you're thinking, I don't know if that's for me, or maybe therapy is not for me, that's absolutely okay. I was actually more like that second group, and you know what? I still followed case management strategies throughout all of my career. Social workers will do case management, and so it's important to have these skills. I guarantee you none of these assignments here are useless. All of them are going to have a reason for being assigned and the goal to build your competency in case management. Now also realize, I understand this is one of your earlier classes in the term. So I will give you some grace and we are going to learn together. It's okay to make mistakes. It's going to be a safe place to do that, because if you're going to make a mistake in social work, let's do it in the program now, right? And let's learn from these mistakes. So you don't need to be worried or fearful. I will make sure that you gain the most positive experience from this course that I can, okay? Now, some of you may be saying, okay, cool, so like SpongeBob here, why should I care? Why does case management matter? What is it? Why do I care? Okay, well, let me give you a few reasons based on my experience. Case management drives the purpose, energy, and progress of a client or family. Case management, the plan that we set up, the strategies that we determine and follow up on, the treatment we provide, the resources that we coordinate, okay? We are like the quarterback on a football team. And what happens is, after each play, what does the quarterback do? Calls the huddle, calls everyone back to the huddle, and says, here's our next play, right? And after they break from that huddle, they act that play out, and they hope that they advance down the field. Case management is a similar process to that. You put a plan in place, you run that play, you determine the outcome of it, and then that sets up your move for the next play, okay? Now, case management establishes clear objectives, action items, timeframes, and milestones to monitor progress, okay? Remember, we are dealing with vulnerable populations that have maybe lived for decades or even generations in dysfunction. No one has ever set a plan for success with a family or a client that you're working with, and therefore, case management is important because what we're doing is establishing these steps for success. Case management is literally evidence of services provided in contact with clients. At some point in this term, I will be talking about times when you will be called into court. You will literally be subpoenaed to court, and you have to answer to the notes that you have written via case management. I have been on the stand a few times, called by the judge to answer to notes that I have written. And thank God that because my trainer, all right, gave me an opportunity to learn in real time and prepare me for court appearances, did those court cases go successfully. But I have also seen social workers called to the stand, and it hasn't been pretty and it hasn't gone well for them because they had not developed their skill set as case managers, okay? And so your notes that you write are literally going to be evidence to the court, evidence to your agency, evidence to your contractors, and to, for example, the Medi-Cal or a clinic that you provided those services. And God forbid something awful happens to a client at some point. Someone's going to open that file that didn't have anything to do with that case previously, and they're going to want to ask you some questions, okay? Now, a case management plan informs supervisors, the agency, the court, and families of progress. It lets everyone know how we're all doing in assisting on moving a client or a family forward, okay? And it determines the outcome of a case. Now, I say case, but I also want to reiterate that a case to a social worker is a human life, right? And so we are developing a plan not just for a case. We are developing a plan that will impact the outcome of a human life, a mother, a daughter, a son, a father, an aunt, an uncle, what we decide to plan. And we're going to talk about that later in the term, how to plan effectively, how to conduct a biopsychosocial spiritual assessment, and the follow-up, all right, that we deliver related to this case plan, all right, is going to directly impact the well-being of another human life. And this is why it's important. All right, case management is the driving force behind all service delivery, planning, follow-up, and billing for service delivery, okay? There's a saying in our field that if you didn't write it, if it wasn't written down, then it didn't happen, okay? A judge will tell you that, an auditor will tell you that, a lawyer will tell you that, your supervisor will tell you that at some point. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen, okay? And so we rely on case management. This is a major tool that we use in our career as social workers to move those clients along that are in need of help of advocacy and support, as well as to demonstrate to others that we have done our jobs, okay? All right, now this course is going to have a balance of the head and the heart. And what I mean by that is social workers need to operate with both. That TED Talk that I shared with you in the beginning of our lecture comes from the heart. That is an individual who is bringing passion and energy and excitement and dedication to their job. That social worker also is competent, is skilled, is educated. And my goal is to provide you with both in this course. Please understand that my lectures are going to be very technical. We're going to talk about skills. We're going to talk about how to do something, okay? But please don't ever move away from losing your heart and your passion. So yes, at times you're going to say, wow, this is really technical. Man, I got into this field because I just wanted to help people, and now I need to do all of these technical things. Just like any job, okay? You need to do that. Any professional, even a football player that loves the game, still needs to learn the technical side of their position and their role, okay? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to balance the head and the heart in our conversations. the textbook that you have been assigned is going to keep you in the hard arena. It's going to talk about, as we move through these technical pieces, to what it means to effectively case manage our clients, okay? The skills that we need to do, it's going to remind you that how we do those skills are equally important. It's not enough to say to someone, I want the best for you, okay? It's about how we say it, how we show it, how we demonstrate our dedication to the clients that we're serving. And so there will be a balance in this course, okay? Now, I want to give you a funny example of what happens when we spend too much time in one arena. If we spend too much time in the hard arena, then what happens is we can be very passionate, we can be very energetic, but we may not have the skills that we need to move a client forward through case management. So we're missing the head piece. But likewise, if we spend too much time in the head arena, okay, then what happens is we come up with some really wacky ideas of how to do things because they miss the heart, okay? Reverend King had stated that everyone in life needed to be what we called hard-minded, okay, and tender-hearted. Hard-minded meant that you had to be educated, you had to be sharp, you had to be on your game, on point when it came to you cognitively being able to implement change. But what he meant by tender-hearted was you had to care for the individuals that you were creating change with or for, okay? So let's give a funny example of what happens when we spend too much time in the head arena. Dakota Tribal Wisdom says that when you discover you are riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. Makes sense. However, in larger governmental or modern systems, we have developed far more advanced strategies, which include, so let's come through some of these strategies that we came up with for using a dead horse, okay? Buy a stronger whip, change riders, threaten to terminate the dead horse, say things like, this is the way we've always ridden a dead horse, appoint a committee to a dead horse to study a dead horse, arrange to visit other sites to see how they ride dead horses, create a training session to increase our riding ability, harness several dead horses together for increased speed, declare that no horse is too dead to be beaten, provide additional funding to increase the horse's performance, declare a horse is better, faster, and cheaper dead. This is a good thing, this dead horse, right? Study alternative uses for dead horses, rewrite the expected performance expectations for all dead horses, and finally, my very favorite, promote the dead horse to a supervisor position, right? I have no clue what to do with this person. Let's just promote them, right? And so the funny thing about this is that in the course of my 15 years providing case management and working with policy, I have seen this thinking dominate our approach in the field of social work. I have seen individuals who are brilliant. Excuse me. I am so sorry. Allergies kicked in. I apologize for that. I have seen individuals who are brilliant, highly educated, genius when it comes to the technical skills of being a social worker, absent of the heart, detached from who they're serving, and as a result, we come up with some wacky ideas for what policy is intended to do to make the lives better of the clients we're serving, okay? And so, I want to bring us back to some words of wisdom from Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein had said we can't solve problems using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. In order to move ourselves away from this mode of thought here, of wacky head-oriented policy that's absent of the heart, absent of being tender-hearted, all right, then we need to be original in our thinking. We need to be creative in our thinking. We cannot follow the same mode of thought we used to get into a problem to get out of it, okay? So let's talk about policy really briefly here because it's important to understand that a lot of what you have been mandated to do as social workers related to case management, meaning the forms that you use, the criteria for diagnosing, the criteria for determining strategies, when your notes are to be turned in, who they get turned into, all of that is determined by policy, okay? So as social workers, when you get into an agency and there's someone saying, you said, well, I would like to do A, B, and C, and your coworker in the cubicle leans back next to you and says, we can't do that. And you're like, why can't we do that? And they'll lean back and say, because it's policy, we can't do that. And you're going to say, well, where did this policy come from? Well, policy comes from people. And people develop policy, and that impacts you as a social worker, and it impacts case management. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk very briefly about why policy matters. And then what I'm going to do is share with you a historical quick analysis of a policy that you will step into at some point in the field of social work that you need to be aware of because it's a new policy shift that occurred in the last few years. Okay, so why does policy matter? A policy in the formal sense is a set of ideas or plans that is used as a basis for making decisions, especially in politics, economics, or business, okay? Now, on a real level, remember what I said, I'm going to break this down into an everyday level, okay, implementation level. Policy, what it does is it shapes our attitudes, our actions, and it shapes the attitudes and actions of governments, systems, and individuals. Policy says what is to be done, who does it, and whom it's being done to and how. So you see how suddenly policy matters. Let me just share with you really quickly. When I was a new social worker, and I just finished grad school and stepped into my career, I thought to myself, I don't ever want to work in the field of policy. Policy sounds boring. I'm going to say it, right? Paperwork sounds boring. I'm just being honest with you. These were my thoughts early on. And quickly, it wasn't until I was sitting in that cubicle saying, I have an idea, or can I try this? Or what if we did this? And I quickly understood that I could or could not do something because of policy, that suddenly policy began to matter to me, okay? And so I want to share with you this early on, okay, in your education, so you hopefully appreciate a little bit about policy, and especially as it relates to case management, okay? Literally your job expectations when you finish this program. Policy impacts individuals in intended and unintended forms. So every time someone sits in a room and says, I have a great idea, we are going to develop a policy, and this policy will mean that everyone does this or no one does that. There will be an intended consequence of what they were going for when implementing that policy, but guess what? There are bound to be unintended consequences that arise from that. Policy, therefore, stands for what a government, system, or individual is all about, okay? So if there is a policy in your agency that says your assessments, okay, for case management, your assessments are due within 48 hours of the intake of a client. But there's also a policy saying that you must meet with that client in person, that you must also have all the forms signed, but you also must introduce yourself, introduce your supervisor, and also make an attempt to build rapport with that client. That our policy is about relationship in our work. So not only what work is to be done, but how we do it. Then you have created a policy that says we care about the work to be done because we care about the person that we're serving. So policy also says, when you read a company's policy, it says what they're about, who they are, what they represent, okay? So let me share with you this recent policy that came into effect, and it actually follows a very brief timeline of what we consider to be a landmark case in the field of child welfare and of social work. The reason why I want to share with you this policy and these legislative shifts is because now, as social workers, if you are going to serve children and families, be it foster children in child welfare, or if you are going to serve adults who have children in the foster care system or have been removed or some point are receiving social services support, okay, through the county, you will encounter this policy. This policy will literally dictate what you say to a client, how you say it, what paperwork you submit, what bills you, what codes you bill for. It literally is going to dictate your job. And so I want you to just understand where this has come from. The other reason I want you to have this material, and I'm happy you chose CBU, is because this material is real, it is current, okay? And in my career as a social worker, I have worked not only to inform policymakers of what was planned, okay, in relation to this policy, but I've also provided feedback directly to the state along with other providers in leadership positions to say, hey, here's how this policy is playing out and its intended and unintended consequences with the social workers that I am hiring in my agency. And so I want you to have a real portrayal of this policy so you understand that when you are out there doing case management, okay, in your future careers, here's where it came from. Now, I'm going to share with you a little bit about this KDA lawsuit and the birth of what we call the Continuum of Care Reform Act, okay, here in California. Now, on July 18th, 2002, a class action lawsuit was filed, okay, against the California Department of Social Services, that's CDSS, and Los Angeles Department of Children and Family Services, that's LADCFS. Now, LADCFS, for those of you who may not know, is Los Angeles County's Child Protective Services Department, okay? The case was later settled 9 years later in 2011. Now, KDA, the name for our lawsuit, came from the name of a girl. KDA was a 14-year-old girl who had spent 10 years in foster care, and she died in placement, okay? While KDA was alive, she was in 37 different placements, including 19 psychiatric placements. 19 placements, you guys. Psychiatric placements in her short life, 14 years old. Now, as an investigation was being conducted of KDA's death, concerns were found to be systemic, and gaps between Child Services Department and the Department of Mental Health were identified. In a nutshell, what happened here is when people went in to investigate KDA's death, what they saw was professionals who were social workers on the non-clinical side and professionals who were offering mental health services, some of which were MFTs and some of which were also social workers, licensed clinical social workers, were not talking. The two were not coming together and planning treatment. They were not engaged in their case management simultaneously. And as a result, kiddos were dying in care. KDA was one of those kiddos, but they discovered that there were many more children who died in care as a result of professionals not talking and coordinating together. That's awful, okay? The case was settled in 2011, and what happened from that in the state of California was an integrated core practice model, what we refer to as ICPM was born. You don't need to be an expert in that just yet. What I'm going to give you is the practical breakdown of what all this is during this course, during case management. Also, what happened was the Continuum of Care model, okay, was born. This was an act, a legislation act that was placed in front of the House and was passed, okay, in order to mandate now services that needed to be coordinated, that needed to involve the client and the family, and needed to include mental health and non-clinical services coming together with their case management to develop one solid plan for the family. Briefly, this quick chart here just demonstrates what life looked like, okay, for children and families before KDA and the Continuum of Care Reform Act here in California. So what happened was that kiddos who needed care, or it may have been involved with one of these systems or even more. So mental health, maybe they were seeing a therapist at a clinic, a county clinic, or providing agency. Child Protective Services may have been involved at the county level. Juvenile probation may have been involved if the child had maybe committed some sort of crime or offense at this point. Maybe education system was involved if the child was tardy or absent for extended lengths from school, or maybe they were involved in disciplinary action at the school. And what happened is that children who often had the most going on in their lives, what we refer to as children with complex needs, children who were traumatized, abused, and experiencing a loss on all levels or multiple levels of their life, often fell through the cracks. And what happened was it was because professionals were not talking. The therapist wasn't talking to the social worker with the county. The social worker with the county wasn't talking to the probation officer. The probation officer wasn't talking to the school. And as a result, strategies were missed that allowed children to fall through the cracks, sometimes with devastating consequences such as deaths, okay? And so what happened was that the Continuum of Care Reform Act in particular represented the massive paradigm shift in the state of California. What I'm sharing with you is so significant, and this is why I wanted you to have it, because some state policymakers have said that the Continuum of Care Reform Act that came as a result of the KDA lawsuit that I just shared with you, all right, is the most significant policy shift in child welfare, okay, in the history of California. You are stepping into this new field, these requirements, okay? Now, what I want you to be excited for, though, is you need not worry and you need not distress, because I've also been able to speak directly into this process and participate in some of these discussions. On top of that, what is required now of Continuum of Care Reform is to provide case management services, okay, aligned with and similar to a program that have been doing this for a very long time, including children and families in the process. The name of that program is Wraparound. Over the past 15 years, I have had the pleasure of practicing wraparound as a direct care staff, doing wraparound with children and families, also leading wraparound teams, leading wraparound programs, and to this day, I still advocate for wraparound at the state level, okay? So I'm gonna make sure that in this class you receive everything you need to know, all right, to step into the field and be prepared, all right, in your journey. So prior to Continuum of Care Reform, what happened was, let's look at this child and family in the middle, okay? If you were a child or family in need of help and you need a therapist, guess what? You drove to a county clinic or to a provider to get therapy. If you were on probation, then you need to drive to the courts, all right, to talk to your probation officer. If you needed a food bank, or you needed to connect with your church, or you needed housing supports, guess what? You drove to all of those appointments too, all right? And if you needed help from a teacher or a tutor, guess what? You went to the school. And so what happened was, and we know this, if some of you have kids, all right, or if you've cared for little ones in your family, is that if you have to take a kid to one place during the day, all right, you can probably do that. Two, okay. Three is getting a little busy. Now imagine that in that household present, there's abuse. Maybe there's substance dependency. Maybe there's domestic violence. Maybe there's no resources for utilities. Maybe housing isn't even secured and you're sleeping out of your car. Maybe you don't have a car, right? And you're sleeping on the streets or in shelters. Then what happened was, just like before, those families that needed the most help, those families that presented with what we call complex needs, fell through the cracks. Under Continuum of Care Reform Act, what it required was that all the professionals need to be talking at the same time with the family that they should be planning with and not for. And so please hear me when I say this, that we plan with the family's input, not for the client, okay? And what happens is that all of those plans need to be integrated and aligned with one another. So at the center of this process, guess who we have? The client, right? The actual child, the family, the identified client. Imagine that. That may sound very simple to you all. You may say, well, of course, why wouldn't we put the client first in our planning as social workers? Unfortunately, that has not always been the practice or the mandate. We have said that, but our practice hasn't imitated that. And so what's important to understand is Continuum of Care Reform has stated this is what needs to happen. The child, the family, the identified client needs to be at the center of their plan. After that, we need to surround them with informal supports. We'll talk about what informal supports are in another discussion, another lecture. Then, if they're receiving mental health or education services, that therapist, that counselor, that teacher need to be involved, okay, in what's going on with the family, and they need to coordinate with the resources in the community. And finally, if there's CPS involved, Child Protective Services or probation, whatever the case is, that all of these plans need to overlap. Everyone needs to have input into the plan with the family, and everyone has the same plan. That everyone's working off of one plan so they understand what effort and resources we're putting into to assist this client, this child, this family, okay? So here's where we are today, okay? Now, remember that Continuum of Care Reform Act, okay? The CCR is what it's referred to as, okay? Continuum of Reform Act was implemented on January 1st. It went into effect January 1st, 2017. CCR is also referred to as Assembly Bill 403, Assembly Bill 403, okay? And the integrated core practice model that I talked about have significantly modified and redefined best practice, okay, philosophy for mental health professionals and social workers, both combined. State systems of care, such as the California Department of Healthcare Services, which is our state's mental health services, okay, and the California Department of Social Work Services, which is our state's child welfare, okay, or social services agencies, okay. Both employ social workers, just one on DHCS side. You would be more often than not, practicing from a clinical piece, so you might be working towards licensure or are licensed. California Department of Social Services, you may be licensed. Maybe you're not providing as many clinical services, but you're licensed, or you may be an MSW, okay? We're largely impacted. So here's some other changes in the state of California. Just real quickly, we don't need to spend a lot of time on these, but it's important to understand some of the significant shifts. In California, sometimes you've heard of kids who are in foster care growing up in what we refer to as group homes, okay? Now there are no more technically group homes in the state of California. What we refer to them as short-term residential treatment placements, or STRTPs, okay? There's a lot more to that. If you ever are interested in that, you can just reach out to me and we can spend a little time chatting, but just so you have an overview. We no longer use the word foster family in the state of California. We refer to foster families as resource families. We refer to foster family agencies as resource family agencies. A number of steps were enacted to streamline the process for foster family agencies in the state of California. The process for certifying resource families was streamlined, like I said, and the level of system of residential care was eliminated, okay, and an emphasis was put on short-term care. What we wanted was for children to be home with their families whenever possible, and if they had to remain in residential care, that they were out of residential care as quickly as possible in order to be back in a home setting. That has some intended consequences that could be positive for children and families. There are some considerations for potential concerns that need to be addressed, but again, that's another lecture for another day. So please just reach out to me. So MFTs and MSWs are now required to enter the field with specific, skill sets that may be new to you. So here's what I want to share with you. Here is what, as a result of Continuum of Care Reform Act, social workers, you all are going to be required to do when you step into the field, okay? So if you're going to work for a residential treatment center that works with children and families, okay, and children who are in care, there's this head of service role that's been dictated. Now that head of service must be a licensed, what we call a licensed mental health professional, or LMHP. Now that could be, a good news is an LCSW. So if you are thinking of going the clinical route, this means that there might be more jobs available for you all in that clinical side. Individual and group therapy must be integrated into programming. And so what this means is that there's more groups and clinical services ideally being offered to children and families in residential settings who have complex needs. And so you're going to need more practitioners to do that. So again, more availability of jobs for potential LCSWs, MSWs who have registered interns, okay? A mental health provider who is an MHP or an MSW provides case management of youth concurrently. So here's the major thing to understand is that if you are an MSW and you're providing case management to a child, okay, who's in the foster care system, guess what? You are also having conversations with the mental health practitioner who is providing the therapy or the clinical services, and you need to do that concurrently so that a child doesn't fall through the gaps and die again, okay? That's the result of that. They're getting the services that they need to be safe and to move forward in their case plans, okay? Mental health practitioners will team with formal and informal supports such as social workers, probation officers, and youth and family. Now, the idea behind this is you're no longer working alone. There's no longer a therapist just seeing a client on their couch and then they leave the clinic. There's no longer a social worker going out and only having one-on-one contact and not talking to anyone else, okay? There's a time set under Continuum Care Reform where everyone comes to the same table, sits down at the same time, and discusses with the family what is best, okay, what this family needs, what they need, and what they want even, all right, and what are we going to do to move this family and help them meet their goals. And finally, mental health providers will supervise and lead clinical and non-clinical staff, so there will be room for supervision opportunities. To push all services for mental health and social work be delivered in the home or in field settings. Folks, for the large majority of my career in social work, my case management services were not done in an office. I had an office, there was a cubicle and things like that. The majority of my services were done in the family's home, okay, where they lived, okay? Personally, I love that. I love the idea because nothing was ever the same. To me, it was fun and exciting, okay? But with that, there's some safety precautions to keep in mind. We will also discuss that in this term. And there will be increased opportunities for administrative positions for social workers and licensed mental health professionals. So what this all means at this time is there is a continued use for social workers and mental health practitioners. You will be working in teams when you leave this job, and on top, or when you leave this program, and on top of that, you have to be coordinating services together, okay? There's no solo in this process. So, quick recommendations of what you want to do to be successful stepping into the field of child welfare as a social worker with this new policy. To adopt a sound theoretical framework in which to serve children and families. You will have exposure to theoretical frameworks while in this program, so you don't need to worry. You want to sharpen your assessment skills, and guess what? We're going to talk about assessment in this class, all right? So you're going to get that here. Invest in training and development and leadership and administration, and guess what? You will have the opportunity to develop in certifications throughout the time in the MSW program. Value and develop your skills working as a team. You got to get used to being collaborative and working with others. Prepare yourself for delivering services in the field or the community. We will talk about a little bit about field safety in this class, okay? Develop your case management and non-clinical case planning, and familiarize yourself with evidence-based practices, to which in the course of this program, you will be exposed to evidence-based practices throughout your courses. Now, what you want to stay away from is being afraid of change. As a social worker for the past 15 years, things have changed on me daily, sometimes multiple times in a day. That's just part of our role, so we can't fear change. as a social worker. We can't stay stagnant in our training. What I learned 5 years ago, some of it's not even applicable or even relevant anymore. And so I've had to continue to be trained and continue to hone my skills as a social worker. The same will be with you, a commitment to lifelong learning, okay? Don't under-communicate or don't under-communicate clinical or court-related milestones, progress, or concerns. I'm gonna give you tips for how to document thoroughly, but make sure you're not writing pages and pages of documentation and spending your day writing something that no one's gonna read, okay? I'm gonna give you real practical tips for how to write like a social worker in a concise but effective manner. Avoid matters related to confidentiality. Don't avoid those, okay? Now, when you're working with more people, that means more ideas, but you also need to make sure that what you're doing is you're not telling everyone business that is confidential to the family. We'll talk about confidentiality in this course as well. And don't be afraid to take calculated risks and input from your team. Sometimes what seemed like a risk when I was doing my case management, as long as it was informed, it was calculated, and I had the backing of my supervisor. Some of those led to the most amazing success stories involved with children and families that I worked with. And so you can't be afraid of risk as a social worker, but you do want to make sure you're staying in the bounds of what is safe, obviously what is legal, and within our ethical standards as social workers. We'll also talk a little bit about how to do that well, okay? All right. So finally, I know this is all overwhelming. You're saying, holy smokes, I didn't know there was this much involved to social work. Don't worry. All right, look, the field can change, policy can change tomorrow, but ultimately, and I put this here, your work matters, and ultimately, you know why? Because you matter. You see, I highlighted that there, you matter, okay? Ultimately, policy has to be implemented somewhere. It has to be implemented with us as social workers. And so what I've taken comfort in is knowing that whenever a policy is implemented and it starts to go a little wacky in its implementation, and there's some things that were unintended that need to be addressed, we can bring that back to the process and work on fixing that, okay? So don't worry, right? You're stepping into the field. You don't need to know it all, but I promise you this class will give you a lot of what you want to know, all right, to make you competitive in that job search later. All right. Finally, this scripture verse from Romans gives me comfort in times where I feel maybe like I'm overwhelmed, like everything's changing around me and I'm concerned with where I fit in with all this. We know that all things work for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Folks, ultimately, even though we're going to talk about a lot of technical issues in this class, you're in this class and in this program because you believed in people, you believed in creating a better world around you. And so if that's the case, follow that. Follow your faith, follow your belief in good, okay? And policy can change, but your faith in Christ, your faith in what you're doing is right, all right, stays fixed, and for that reason, you don't need to worry, right? Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, right? All right. So I want to talk about this policy piece in particular tied to biblical themes so you can understand what it looks like when we rock the boat related to policy, and in particular, why policy is so important, just to drive home this fact. And I really like this little piece because I like to talk about in biblical settings why Jesus was considered such a rabble rouser in his day, right? To the point where people wanted him dead as a result, and he was crucified as a result of challenging, okay, policies that existed during that time. So Jesus in his day was considered a radical, a rabble rouser, right? He broke socio-political norms. He violated those norms. He challenged the status quo. So the individuals in power, such as the Romans and the Pharisees, were threatened and angered by Jesus' words and actions. All right, they were concerned for this, and as a result, he was punished severely and brutally killed as a result of his policies, as were his disciples. Okay, in our days, we may think to ourselves, well, what was it that was so radical about Jesus' time and the policies that he was implementing or calling for to be implemented that significantly shook, right, the Romans and the Pharisees. So let's take a look. A little caffeine time right there. All right, so social norms challenged by Jesus. So back in the day, okay, these social norms were established by the Pharisees, all right, as well as Jewish culture, okay, related to what were considered norms in Jesus' day. So in Jesus' day, in public settings and in social, okay, settings, all of that in life, you didn't touch lepers, okay? You don't eat with sinners, tax collectors, prostitutes, or other individuals who were viewed as unclean, all right, in culture. You don't speak to women or hold them in elevated status. You don't speak or interact with Gentiles, which are non-Jews, okay? And as Jesus went about doing works in the name of his Father, he defied social norms and broke Jewish laws and threatened the power structure and stability of communities and provinces under the rule of the Roman Empire. And so if you notice, all of these policies, Jesus directly, okay, broke in his time. These were laws that were put in place. What's more concerning is Jesus began to challenge, okay, saying that yes, while the Romans may be in rule and they may occupy, all right, our life here, I answer to a higher authority and a higher being, all right, that does not conform to your power. Now, this in the Roman times was scary to a Roman leader, because Roman leaders were responsible for keeping their provinces, in essence, in check, okay, is what they were looking to do. And if you had an uprising in your province too many times, well, guess what? You were, how do I say it, let go, right? And so the consequences for a Roman leader who had an uprising going on in their province was a scary thing to that leader, and they just couldn't have it happen, okay? So let's talk about some biblical themes very quickly related to policy. And these are just some of them, okay? Obviously, Jesus had quite a few policies in place, but here's something to consider. Jesus' policy stood for the individual, the dignity of the individual, right? That all individuals hold intrinsic God-given value and therefore deserve to be treated with dignity. We see this scripture from Matthew chapter 10, verse 29 through 31. Are not two birds sold for a small coin, yet not one of them falls to the ground without your Father's knowledge. Even all the hairs on your head have been counted, so do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. In Matthew, Jesus used this scripture verse, okay, this reminder, all right, that we hold value, intrinsic. We have been created in God's image, and as a result of that, God holds us in esteem and in his creation. Jesus spoke of nonviolence, which in a military time when the Roman army ruled through military prowess, this was a scary thing. So again, from Matthew chapter 5, we see, you have heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, offer no resistance to one who is evil. When someone strikes you on your right cheek, you turn the other one to them as well. If anyone wants to go to the law with you over their tunic, hand him your cloak as well. Should anyone press you into service for 1 mile, go with them for 2 miles. Give to one who asks of you, and do not turn your back on one who wants to borrow. And so what Jesus says here is that if you want to create social change, my policy is not to do that through violence, intimidation, through marching, through battles that the Roman Empire did during that time. My way of creating social change is to do that with nonviolence. This was scary and direct contrast to the policies that were in place at the time. Jesus talked about the distribution of wealth and power. In Matthew, we see Jesus toppled over, okay, tables in the temple who were of individuals who were overcharging, okay, people and keeping them, excluding undesirable groups from worshiping. This was a deliberate act symbolizing economic and legal practices of Jewish society needing to be overturned. When Jesus went into the temple and literally flipped the table over, this was a symbol in Jesus' time of overturning power, of saying this process, whatever's going on here, needs to be overturned. And guess what? People were price gouging in the temple and not allowing people to of disadvantaged or marginalized backgrounds to be able to worship, at least not without a lot of money. And so people were being extorted in these settings, and Jesus stood up for that and said, everyone has a right, okay, to be here and to worship my Father, and you all are making a mockery of that. And he overturned this power differential. This was scary. Civil disobedience. The first public act of Jesus with his disciples was actually to break the law of the land, and was accused of violating the laws of the Sabbath. And so in Mark, we see, you can see this in Mark, okay, chapter 2, verse 23 through 28. As Jesus and the disciples continued his work, he continued to contrast the dominant groups of society. He gave voices to the sick, the poor, the injured, the Gentiles, and the unclean of society. This led him to gaining support by many, but also being hated by those in power. Okay. As social workers at times, you are going to advocate for policy that is not popular, because a social worker's job is to fight for those who have been marginalized, right? To fight for the vulnerable. And so when you stand up against those in power, guess what? You will be met with opposition at times, okay? So some of you may be saying, is there a list somewhere of what Jesus' policies are? Like, does he lay it out in a nice way? And absolutely he does, okay? And I refer to the Beatitudes in this sense, okay? So Matthew chapter 5, verse 3 through 12, let's examine the policies that Jesus stood for as manifested in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will show mercy. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of heaven. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of evil against you falsely because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven. Thus they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This is fascinating. Jesus didn't say in the Beatitudes, blessed are the rich, right? Blessed are those that drive Mercedes, right? Blessed are those with the biggest house. Blessed are those with all the toys. Blessed are those with all the letters behind their name. Jesus says those who are blessed, okay, are poor, okay? They are meek. They mourn, they are in pain, right? They are those who hunger for what is righteous, for social justice, right? They are merciful to others. They are clean of heart. They are peacemakers, right? They are not power brokers, they're peacemakers. They're persecuted. And finally, and I love this piece, is blessed are you, you will be rewarded, all right? When you are insulted and persecuted, when you stand up for these values. So folks, in social work, there's going to be policies that you don't like. You'll discover very quickly that when you speak out against them, you won't always be popular. You won't always be invited to the lunch, all right, in the lunchroom on those certain days. What you need to understand, though, is that that's okay. Jesus was familiar with that. Now, you want to do this, obviously, professionally when you're advocating to change policy. You can't be unprofessional in that nature. But you got to also understand you won't always be liked either, okay? And as a social worker, that's going to be our job, right, is to push for social change that's needed. It's not always liked by those in power, but it's what's needed. Okay. So finally, I want to end today with our centering exercise. I know I threw a lot at you. Let me go back to this really quick and just say thank you so much. Now, this was just a little flavor, just an easy kind of breaking in on what to expect for our class and our time together. As we move forward in the consequent, coming weeks, all right, what we will be doing is, I promise you, I will break down on a practical level all of what this means for case management and support, okay? So finally, let's end with centering. I promised you that at the end of each class, we would end with a centering activity. Now, if you haven't heard of centering before, that's absolutely okay. You don't need to be an expert in this prior to stepping into this class or this program or whatever the case is, okay? I'm sorry, I'm just setting up my timer here because we are going to time the centering activity. So centering, if you've heard of meditation before, centering is the Christian version of meditation. You will also sometimes hear of centering, also maybe meditation. You might have heard of the term mindfulness, okay? And so this is the notion of centering. Okay? Centering actually came to us from an individual named Brother Lawrence, okay? Brother Lawrence was a 15th century lay brother who served in the Carmelite monastery in Paris, France, okay? Now, Brother Lawrence was a quiet guy. And by all accounts, many of the monks who lived in the monastery with Brother Lawrence at first thought that Brother Lawrence was actually a little slow. They said, this guy doesn't speak at all. What's his problem, all right? So they asked Brother Lawrence, well, what is it? Why are you in such what appears to be deep thought or comfort during the day? Why do you speak so little? And Brother Lawrence had shared, well, I'm actually walking in the presence of God, walking in what he referred to as a state of grace. And he said, I'm so deeply entrenched in being aware of the presence of God in this very moment in my life that I'm not really sometimes attuned with everything that's happening around me, all right? And at that point, folks in the monastery said, well, where did you get this idea? You know, where did you get the idea that you're walking in a continuous walk with Christ every single day, at every single moment? And Brother Lawrence had said, well, one early morning, okay, in a transition from winter to spring, I was on a walk. And winter was still there. It was at the end of winter, so it was cold, and it was still rainy, and some things were still frozen. And while I was walking, I saw this bush, and on this bush was a single flower bud that was blooming, okay? And as Brother Lawrence described, he was looking at this bud, this flower blooming, in all of what seems this cold, desolate, sleepy, dead place. And he said, this is an example of God, okay, being present in this moment, still manifesting himself through all of the quiet and the sleep and the death in that moment. And so Brother Lawrence said it was in that moment that I realized that God isn't just present with me when I pray. God's present with me at every single moment that I take in my life, every breath that I have, every conversation that I have, every step that I take. God is with me in that moment. And so Brother Lawrence engaged in what we refer to as the perpetual practice of the presence of God. So if you were to ask Brother Lawrence, when do you pray? Brother Lawrence would say, there is no beginning or end to my prayer, because my life is a continuous awareness that God is present with me in all moments. Now that sounds really nice, huh? It sounds really profound. The monastery, the monks weren't feeling it, right? So they were like, whatever, let's challenge this, let's call them out. And so what they did was they gave Brother Lawrence all of the worst assignments in the monastery. They gave him the dishes to wash. They had him wash their cloaks. He had to go get water from the well. He had to cook for all of them. They found that the worst jobs they gave Brother Lawrence, the more he seemed to be in this state of grace, and he seemed to reflect, and he never became angry or violent with them as a result of that. He never blamed anyone. He just stayed pensive and devout in that moment. And so what Brother Lawrence did was he developed a practice for others to learn about engaging in the perpetual practice of the presence of God. So what Brother Lawrence developed was a notion of doing two things when we center. Two things. One, recognizing God's presence with you in this very moment. Not his presence with you this morning, not his presence with you 20 minutes from now, but stopping and understanding that our Creator is present with us alongside us right now, okay? And the second thing is that Brother Lawrence had talked about using a scripture verse or a word, okay, to focus, to center on the adoration or devotion or your moment of recognition of God's presence in your life. And so that's all we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to sit for 2 quiet minutes. I'm going to give you a scripture verse to consider, and I'm also going to give you a word to focus on. You may choose whichever or both that is for you. In centering, it's up to you to reflect on how God is speaking into you, into your heart, into your spirit related to that scripture verse or that word or phrase. It's not up to me to interpret it for you, right? And so this is something that's very personal. And what I've found with this is that this practice can be carried with you outside of the classroom. That in times when you're worried or overwhelmed, you're scared, or you need to focus before an important meeting, you can take 2 minutes to center, draw yourself into the practice of the presence of God, and it helps push the spiritual reset button for you in your life, okay? So we're going to practice that for our first lesson today, okay? So today's centering and focus word will be this scripture verse from Psalms. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. And our scripture word for today, our focus word will be balance. Balance. So in order to center, what we're going to do is we're going to sit, we're going to put our hands and feet in a nice comfortable position, right? We're going to tune into 2 things. One, what does God speak to you into your heart or your spirit about? Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. And unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Right? How is God speaking balance into your life, his presence into your life? And second, let's just focus on and sit quietly for 2 minutes, realizing God is present with us right now in this moment, right? And let's just be with him in that moment. And so you'll take your hands and feet and put them in a nice comfortable position. You'll go ahead and take a nice deep breath, and you'll close your eyes. If you start to hear any concerns or voices or worries, just push those out of your mind. Acknowledge that they're there, and then quickly just let them go. And then go right back to focusing on the fact that God is present with you. And I will go ahead and keep track of the time. Okay, go ahead and take a nice deep breath. Open your eyes. Welcome back. All right, I hope that that was comforting for you. I know when you're first centering, sometimes it can be a little difficult, right? You can hear those voices coming in, your worries, your thoughts, your to-do list, right, creeping into your mind. Maybe you're thinking about what happened before class, or you're thinking about what happens after. Brother Lawrence says that's okay. When thoughts start to enter our head, let's just acknowledge them. Let's just push them back out. And the longer you can practice centering, you'll actually be able to go longer and longer without those thoughts creeping in. This is something that you can do. I hope that you choose to do it. You know, maybe if it's a moment or two in your car before you step into a meeting, maybe it's just before you step back into the house after a long day. Maybe it's at the end of the day when you want to just kind of press those worries and concerns out of your mind for a brief period of time. But it's something that I do frequently because it helps ground me and just remind me that in every step of my day, I don't need to worry because God's present through it all. Okay. So finally, just some general reminders. Again, I'm exposing you all to my Bitmoji. Here's my official entrance, okay, into the Bitmoji world. So I know it's a little late. It's been a long time coming, but there it is. So there'll be more of those for you to see. Finally, just some reminders. Please check Blackboard for any assignments and due dates that you have related to this course. Please feel free to reach out to me. I am always happy to respond to your emails. I'm happy to set up a meeting with you, a phone call, a WebEx in my office, whatever you want to do. I'm here for you. So all you have to do is reach out and know that I am praying for you. I pray for my students every single day. Know that you are not alone as you move through this process. I am here for you and I'm excited for you. So thank you all so very much. I will see you in the next lecture and have a great day. Thank you.